My name is Kajiwara Ryuichi. Today I'm just an old man. In a corner of Tokyo, in a cheap apartment in Asakusa, I spend my remaining time just gazing at that ridiculously huge steel tower, visible from my window, the Skytree. But once, I was the Wakagashira, the first lieutenant of the Kansai Tenryukai, Kajiwara Ryuichi, a man whose name was known in the darkness of Kobe, a name that made both Yakuza and politicians tremble. Today, I intend to tell it all, about the day that the castle I built with blood crumbled, like a castle of sand, in a single night. The operation the media later dubbed Operation Tornado Tatsumaki Sakusen, the largest and final mass roundup in the history of Japanese crime in the Showa era, the true beginning of the end of our time. The story goes back to the autumn of Showa 53, 1978. Japan had made a miraculous recovery from the burnt plains of the post-war era and was beginning to be called an economic superpower. But the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. We, the Tenryukai, were in the very center of that shadow. Gambling, entertainment, port cargo, and the white powder. Back then, Hirapon, methamphetamine, was still the mainstream, but we were reading the future. We established a route to bring high-purity heroin from the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia into Japan. The third-generation leader of the Tenryukai, Takigawa Gozo, my oyabun, my boss. He was a man who valued the old Ninkyodo, the chivalrous code, but at the same tempo he was colder and more rational than anyone when it came to making money. As his brain, I transformed the Tenryukai from an old-fashioned gambling syndicate into a modern financial and narcotics organization. We thought we were invincible. The police, Mappo, just slipped some cash to the corrupt cops, Inu, and they'd shut up. The politicians, they couldn't do anything without the votes and the black money we collected. That's what we truly believed. But beneath the surface, an enormous power we knew nothing about was moving. It wasn't just the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, the Osaka Prefectural Police, and the Hyogo Prefectural Police. It was America. It was the shadow of the CIA, the lingering scent of the GHQ that had dominated post-war Japan, operating out of Okinawa and keeping an eye on all of Asia. By dipping our hands into the heroin route, we had trespassed on their territory. They spent 18 months, a year and a half, studying us completely. The encrypted radio I used to give orders to my men, the secure phone the Oyabun used from his mistress's house. They were hearing all of it, and they had sent a rat into the very center of our organization. No, they turned a man who was already there into a rat. The catalyst for our ruin was that great meeting, the largest assembly, held once a year, where all the direct clan leaders and executives of the Tenryukai gathered in one place. The agenda, the nationwide expansion of the heroin route, that was the very information they had obtained. The Marubo, anti-Yakuza division commanders from the Tokyo Police, the 4th Investigation Division from Osaka, and the advisors dispatched from the CIA's Tokyo station. They were drafting a plan to dismantle our empire in a single night. How powerless we, the real Yakuza, were against the organized violent apparatus of state power. That operation was the proof. They weren't just trying to arrest us. They were aiming to gather all the top executives of the Tenryukai in one place and wipe us out in one fell swoop. The location was a long-established inn in Arima Onsen, the back parlor of Kobe, called Getsueiru, the Moonlight Pavilion, the place we called the Castle. More than 2,000 police officers were approaching it, holding their breath. They didn't treat us as Yakuza. They treated us as a terrorist organization. Helicopters flew overhead, communications were intercepted, and our every move was monitored. I remember the moon I saw from the inn's window looked unnaturally red. Perhaps it was an omen of the color of blood. What we had built was, after all, only standing on a thin layer of ice called the law. And when that ice broke, all we could do was sink into the cold water. November 15th, Showa 53, 1978. On that day, my life ended once. Operation Tornado truly began to move 2 years prior, in the spring of Showa 51, 1976. I learned this from the trial records. The trigger was when we sank a small timer from the Sumiyoshi Kai in Yokohama Harbor, a nuisance who was blocking our expansion into Tokyo. But that was just the official reason. The real reason was, as I thought, the white powder. What they, the police and the CIA, had their eyes on wasn't the money. It was the smuggling network itself that we had built. A network that stretched from Southeast Asia, through the port of Kobe, and even involved personnel from the US military bases in Okinawa. And now, about the traitor. My right-hand man, the head of my sworn brothers, Shate, Masa, Fujimaki Masatoshi. He was a man I had picked up off the streets, a drifter, I gave him the Tenryu Dragon Crest. I pulled him up to the executive ranks. He was a man who had sworn loyalty, even cutting off his own yubi finger for me twice, taking the fall for me. That Masa was busted in Showa 52, 1977, on a separate assault charge. He was out in just a few months, but that was when it happened. Did they threaten him or buy him? Maybe they shoved photos of his secret mistress and his kid in his face. In any case, Masa became a rat. Our regular meetings were supposed to be held once every 3 months in a different location each time. Oyabun Takigawa was a suspicious man. He believed this was his greatest defense. But Masa sold that pattern to them. And not just that. It was Masa himself who recommended the Getsueru in Arima as the next meeting place. That place was surrounded by mountains on all sides, with only one road in or out. It was perfect for a siege, but if surrounded, it was a mousetrap with no escape. Masa had meticulously prepared to throw every last one of us to the bottom of that trap. Their investigation was thorough. It wasn't just Masa, the insider. They had infiltrated young detectives posing as punks and waiters into the casinos we ran in Minami, Osaka, and the Turkish baths, brothels, in Shinjuku. Those guys were feeding real-time information to headquarters. And the technology. Back in Showa 53, we thought wiretapping was at best pressing a contact mic against a wall. We were naive. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police had set up state-of-the-art directional microphones, provided by the Americans, on the mountain opposite the inn. They recorded everything. Our whispered conversations in the rooms, the click of mahjong tiles. Even our encrypted radio was just a modified fishing radio. They had decoded it all. This operation was literally a joint military operation. The Tokyo police provided intelligence analysis, the Osaka police provided local geography, and the Americans provided international intel on the smuggling routes and the high-tech gear. Their list contained 387 names as primary targets of the Tenryu Kai. The Oyabun Takigawa, me the Wakagashira, the E, all the direct clan bosses, the heroin chemists, and the leaders of our strongest military arm, the Special Attack Squad. They had built a full-scale replica of the Getsuero Inn on a self-defense force training ground and practiced the raid over and over. Armored buses, water cannons, and helicopter units. The terrifying thing about this operation was the secrecy. Even the riot squad members conducting the raid didn't know where they were going or who they were arresting until they got on the bus that day. There was no room for a leak. And what were we doing? We were soaking in the Arima hot springs, throwing banquets with geishas, acting like emperors of the Japanese underworld, spreading out blueprints for our new white castle of heroin. I was drinking the sake Masa poured for me, patting his shoulder, even saying, "You're the next Wakagashira Hosa, adjutant." I missed the fleeting, frozen expression on Masa's face then, or maybe I pretended not to see it. Ruin always starts from within. November 15th, Showa 53, 4:30 a.m. The time came. They weren't satisfied just capturing us. They seized every asset that was our blood and flesh. When that seizure list was read out in court, I understood once again the terror of Operation Tornado. First, the cash. The newspapers said tens of billions of yen, over 100 million, but the reality was far beyond that. From the hidden safe beneath the floor of the Oyabun's room at the inn, nearly 20 billion yen in cash was seized. It was the war chest we had been stockpiling for the coming war with the Sumiyoshi Kai. Masa had told them the location of every safe that only we should have known. The secret waterproof safe at the bottom of the drained hot spring bath, the space behind the hanging scroll, the compartment inside the Buddhist altar. Our castle had been stripped bare by the traitor. Next, the white powder. It wasn't just the 500 kilos of heroin. From hidden warehouses across the country, meth, cocaine, every illegal drug imaginable was seized. They broadcast this on television, transforming our public image overnight from chivalrous Yakuza to merchants of death. Their strategy was correct. And then the weapons. We knew the era of fighting with just daggers and pistols was over. In preparation for the coming war, we had stockpiled weapons siphoned from the Philippines and US military bases in Okinawa, seized 200 assault rifles, 50 boxes of grenades, machine guns, even anti-tank rocket launchers, relics from the old Imperial Army, hidden since the post-war black markets. They reported that we had been preparing for a civil war. Our armored cars, trucks we had a metalworks factory modify, lining the beds with thick steel plates. They were our answer to the riot police's armored buses, our own weaponry. All of them were dragged into the light of day. But more painful than the money or the weapons were the accounts. our legitimate faces, Tenryu Construction, Tenryu Enterprises, over a dozen front companies. Their bank accounts were all frozen simultaneously with the operation. The billions of yen that were supposed to be flowing in stopped in an instant. 128 properties were seized nationwide. The Getsuero Inn, the headquarters in Kobe, the clubs in Ginza, the mansions of the executives. Furthermore, they even found the secret airstrip we had built in the mountains of Gunma, a runway for bringing in special cargo from Taiwan via Cessna. Our encrypted radios, which we believed were state-of-the-art, were all confiscated. They had destroyed our very communication system. But even all of that combined was nothing compared to the last item, the black leather notebook, the ledger where I, as Wakagashira, had recorded everything about the Tenryukai's Underworld. Masa knew where it was. It was hidden in a safe, within a safe, in my home. In it was a list of the politicians we paid monthly consulting fees to, police executives, prosecutors, judges, the names of the dogs in Kasumigaseki, the government district, and Nagatacho, the political district that we kept, along with the amounts paid, dates and locations, all meticulously recorded. That was our source of power, our strongest insurance policy. We believed that as long as we had it, even if the Oyabun or I were arrested, we could use political pressure to crush the case. That notebook fell into the hands of the police, no, into the hands of the Americans. The moment I saw that notebook presented as evidence in the courtroom, I understood our complete defeat. We hadn't just been arrested. Our very existence had been erased. The total estimated value of the seizures, according to the newspapers, was 120 billion yen. It was the moment the empire known as the Tenryukai economically collapsed in a single night. The banquet the night before had lasted until past 3 a.m. The Oyabun had retired to the top-floor special suite with his favorite geisha. I too returned to my room and sank into the thick futon, but I was strangely wide awake. Was it the sake, or was it instinct? Sensing danger, the cold night air of Arima beyond the paper shoji screen felt like it was piercing my skin. 4:30 a.m. The silence was broken, but not by a loud noise. It wasn't an explosion, it was a sound close to an earthquake, as if thousands of feet were stomping on the tatami mats at the exact same instant. "Gasada, it's a raid, it's a raid!" someone screamed, but it was too late. The main entrance of the Getsuero, the kitchen entrance, the employee passage, all of them were breached at the same time. Riot police, wrapped in blue uniforms, holding duralumin shields and batons, flooded in like a tidal wave. They didn't shout, "We have a warrant," like they do when they bust a Yakuza office. They didn't say a word. They just moved like cold machines rushing to their designated posts. The main target was this inn, the Heart, where over 60 of the Tenryukai's top executives were gathered. And this wasn't an attack on a point, it was an attack on an area. At the exact same moment the Getsuero was being subdued, 117 affiliated locations across the country were raided simultaneously. Our headquarters in Minami, Osaka, our front companies in Shinjuku, our port offices in Yokohama. The sky was loud. Self-defense force helicopters hovered directly above the inn, bathing it in searchlights, blaring from loudspeakers. "Do not resist. You are completely surrounded." The mountain road was sealed off by armored buses. There wasn't even space for an ant to escape. Their entry was the perfect execution of their training. We had no time to resist. We were all in our sleeping yukata. Before we could reach for the daggers by our pillows or the pistols hidden in the alcoves, we were pinned down by burly riot cops. They stormed the correct rooms of each executive with perfect accuracy, following the floor plans Masa had provided. The shoji screen of my room was torn open, and 5 officers burst in. "Kajiwara Ryuichi, the Wakagashira, don't move." For the first time in my life, I tasted true powerlessness. The Oyabun, Takigawa, was literally dragged out from his futon while he was in bed with the geisha, the 60-year-old emperor of the underworld, exposed in a pathetic state, wearing nothing but a loincloth in front of the camera lenses. It was humiliation. Me and the 50-plus other executives were all captured. The brain and central nervous system of the Tenryukai were completely paralyzed in less than 30 minutes. At the same time, in the chemical factory in Minami, the place we called the kitchen, where the heroin was refined, a unit in chemical protection suits was breaking in. They seized 500 kilograms of pure heroin, all packed and waiting for shipment. At street prices back then, hundreds of billions of yen. The Special Attack Squad leader, Oni Ken, Demon Ken, Sato Kenji, was also caught at his mistress's house. The professor, the chemist too, the shadow treasurer as well, And what about Masa? Just before the raid, he had slipped out of the inn alone, saying, "I have to go get something I forgot." He was already under police protection, 8 a.m. We, 312 members of the Tenryukai, were stuffed into buses and hauled away. Among them, 43 were the top leadership, including the Oyabun and myself. From the bus window, I watched the Arima Mountains, stained by the sunrise. The flashes of the press, who had gathered in hordes, illuminated the end of our empire for all to see. The 312 of us who were arrested. We weren't treated as a simple criminal organization, but as enemies of the state managed by numbers. The newspapers ran our mugshots and biographies day after day, as if they were spoils of war. At the very top, of course, was the third, Takigawa Gozo. But the one they really wanted was me, the Wakagashira, Kajiwara Ryuichi. The papers painted me as the brain of the Tenryukai, the architect of the narcotics route, the man responsible for transforming an old Yakuza family into an international crime syndicate. They were right. And the other executives, Kizu Ken, Scar Ken, Takeda Kenichi, who managed our interests in Tokyo. He was a man who had started countless turf wars over Kabukicho. Behind that militant face, he was connected to the bureaucrats in Kasumigaseki. His arrest sent shockwaves through the Tokyo underworld. Then there was Mama Reiko of Akasaka, Todo Reiko. Publicly, she was the matron of a high-class restaurant in Akasaka, but in reality, she was the head of the Tenryukai's intelligence division. Top politicians and business magnates gathered at her restaurant night after night. She fed me the pillow talk she gathered there. Among her clients may have been some of the very men directing this Operation Tornado. Her arrest shook Nagatacho. Professor Hiraoka, the one in charge of refining the white powder. He was originally an assistant professor of chemistry at a national university, but was kicked out for embezzling research funds, and I picked him up. He was a genius at turning crude opium from Southeast Asia into 99.9% pure number 4 heroin. He was arrested in the kitchen in Minami, still wearing his white lab coat and the symbol of our violence, Oni Ken, Demon Ken, Sato Kenji, the man who led the Tenryukai's special attack squad. His job was to process the clan's enemies and educate others. With his arrest, the fangs of the Tenryukai were pulled. Oni Ken and his 28 men were ambushed at their training facility in the mountains, while they were still asleep. But the biggest blow wasn't the arrest of us militants. It was that they uprooted our accountants and legal experts. 15 accountants, lawyers, and real estate brokers. They weren't Yakuza. They were highly educated, wore suits, and were specialists in washing our black money into white money. They broke down crying in court. We didn't know they were Yakuza, but they were the foundation of our empire. And because of the Black Notebook, our corruption route was completely severed. The police executives who leaked us information and obstructed investigations, they too were forced to resign one after another immediately after the operation, under the guise of internal whistleblowing. The police's goal wasn't to arrest us, it was to render us non-functional, and that goal was achieved perfectly. We were reduced to a naked group, stripped of protection, information, and money. We, the 312 executives, were dispersed and held in detention centers in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe. All contact with the outside world was cut off, but the Tenryukai was not dead yet. What they had arrested was the brain and the central nervous system, but the body, it was still moving. Several thousand members were still on the streets. The retaliation began 6 hours after the operation was executed. As soon as the news spread that the Oyabun and I had been taken, the young members left behind, especially the remnants of Oni Ken's attack squad, began to run wild. They attacked the Koban, police boxes in Osaka and Kobe. They threw Molotov cocktails and fired hunting rifles. This wasn't a negotiation to demand our release. It was simply the death cry of an organization that had lost its leaders. They blockaded the Hanshin Expressway with trucks and set them on fire. The city of Kobe instantly turned into a war zone. Ordinary citizens were terrified, and the city's functions were paralyzed. Gas stations, department stores, train stations. They began to destroy daily life, lashing out at random. That urban warfare lasted for 72 hours. The result, 14 dead, 6 police officers, 3 civilians caught in the crossfire, and 5 of our members shot dead by the riot police. The newspapers condemned us as enemies of society. Our connections in the US apparently tried to retaliate too. They attacked Japanese managers of rival organizations in Hawaii and Los Angeles, but it backfired. The FBI moved immediately and arrested all of them as well. Our international route was thus completely crushed. The The Japanese government took an unprecedented response to these riots. The Osaka and Hyogo police forces weren't enough. Over 5,000 riot police from across the country were sent in as reinforcements. And not just that, the self-defense forces, the SDF, armored vehicles and SDF soldiers carrying assault rifles began patrolling the streets of Kobe. It was like martial law. The government came to suppress this not as a Yakuza gang war, but as an internal insurrection. Helicopters flew overhead, and checkpoints were set up at major intersections. 3 days later, the young members, who had been raging so fiercely, ran out of ammunition, became exhausted, fell into despair, and scattered. An attack without a leader is nothing more than disorganized violence. And they, the government, suppressed that disorganized violence with an overwhelming organized violence and with absolute ease. I heard the news on the radio in my solitary cell at the detention center that the SDF had been deployed. In that moment, I understood. Operation Tornado wasn't over. Arresting us was phase 1, and then provoking the retaliation from the remnants, suppressing that as an insurrection with the power of the SDF, winning public opinion, and completely isolating us, the Yakuza, as a social evil. That was the scenario they had written. We had just been dancing on the palm of their hand until the very bitter end. Our trial was the show of the century. Operation Tornado was heavily promoted as a new model case for Japanese police organization and US-Japan international cooperation. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police, the National Police Agency, and the CIA. Using this operation as a catalyst, they established a permanent joint investigation headquarters, real-time intelligence sharing, the latest wiretapping technology, financial investigation methods to follow the flow of money. They used us, the Tenryukai, as guinea pigs to establish the know-how for annihilating the Yakuza. This Tenryukai model would later be applied to the other giant organizations, the Yamaguchi Gumi, the Inagawa Kai, the Sumiyoshi Kai. The summit operations, Chojo Sakusen of the 80s, and later the anti-organized crime law, Butaiho. The origin of all of it was our destruction. The trial of us 312 lasted for years. The Oyabun, Takigawa Gozo, died of illness inside the detention center mid-trial. Countless charges. They even tried to apply insurrection charges. I, as the Wakagashira, took responsibility for everything and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and I spent 20 of those years inside. When I got out, Japan was a completely different country from the one I knew. The Showa era was over. It was an era called Heisei. The bubble economy had long since burst and the streets had no life. Our Tenryukai was gone, without a trace. The money, the territory, everything was lost. All assets had been confiscated by the state. The politicians and police executives who had protected us, exposed by the Black Notebook, were all disgraced. The traitor, Masa Fujimaki Masatoshi, no one knows where he disappeared to. The only rumor that remains is that he was protected by the US government's witness protection program and is living a comfortable life somewhere, maybe Hawaii. With my fall, there was no successor. The Tenryukai, like a giant snake that had lost its head, self-destructed in internal conflicts and fragmented. The small groups that remained were eventually absorbed by the Yamaguchi Gumi or the Inagawa Kai. Our heroin route, of course, was also completely destroyed. Today, there is no one left who even speaks the name Tenryukai. I am Kajiwara Ryuichi, 78 years old, an old man, just waiting to die alone in this cheap apartment in Asakusa. I built an empire with blood and betrayal, and in a single tornado of one night I lost it all. Why am I talking about this now? It's not to beg for forgiveness. Such a thing doesn't exist for me. I just wanted to leave it as a record that men like us truly existed in this country, and how pathetically we were erased. That red moon I saw in Arima that night, was it the color of our blood? Or was it the cold, unblinking eye of surveillance shining down on us? It doesn't matter anymore. It started to rain. This old apartment leaks badly.